"Ghost, stay back. Don't move." The whisper tore from my dry throat, barely audible over the sudden deafening pounding of my own heart. I didn't dare breathe. I didn't dare blink. My fingers gripped the freezing aluminum armrest of my folding camp chair so hard my knuckles turned sharp, bloodless white. It was 1:00 a.m. in the absolute dead heart of Yellowstone National Park, and until this very second, the silence had been absolute. Just minutes ago, the world was nothing but the quiet, comforting hiss of the wind sweeping through the ancient lodgepole pines and the faint, rhythmic ticking of my camper van's engine cooling down in the freezing night air. I had deliberately parked miles away from the designated campgrounds, miles away from the paved tourist roads, miles away from anything resembling human civilization. That was the whole point. I needed the isolation. I craved the endless emptiness. I had driven my battered Ford Transit deep into the American backcountry to escape the noise, the suffocating crowds, and the sudden, loud sounds of the city that always sent my mind spiraling back to a dark place I was desperately trying to forget. But right now, the crushing isolation felt less like a sanctuary and much more like a trap. The air outside was bitter cold, the kind of biting, unforgiving chill that sinks straight through your flannel jacket and settles deep into your bones. The campfire I had built a few hours earlier had long since died down to nothing more than a small pile of glowing orange embers casting faint, dancing shadows against the dirt. I was just sitting there, a mug of cold black coffee still gripped tightly in my hands, staring out into the pitch black tree line, enjoying the feeling of being entirely alone in the world. Then I heard it. It wasn't the light, frantic rustling of a raccoon digging through the brush, or the quick darting snap of a mule deer moving through the trees. It was a heavy, deliberate, earth-shaking crack, the distinct sound of a thick green branch being snapped effortlessly beneath an unimaginable weight. It was the kind of sound you feel in the soles of your boots before it even fully registers in your ears. Something massive was moving out there, and it was moving toward the fading light of my fire. At my feet lay Ghost. He is a 90-pound German Shepherd mix I pulled from a high-kill shelter in Wyoming 6 months ago. The shelter staff told me he was a lost cause, a broken animal. He had been severely abused, left tied to a rusted radiator in an abandoned warehouse for weeks. Because of his past, he was terrified of the world, flinched at sudden movements, and completely distrusted humans. But the most defining thing about Ghost was his absolute, unbroken silence. In the entire half year we had lived together in the cramped, 20-square-foot confines of the van, crossing state lines and sleeping under the endless canopy of stars, I had never heard him make a single sound, not a whimper when he was hungry, not a whine when he was anxious, and definitely never ever a bark. He existed like a phantom, hence the name I gave him, moving quietly through my life, a silent, wounded companion perfectly reflecting my own broken, hollowed-out state. But when that second branch snapped in the darkness, echoing like a muffled gunshot through the frigid Yellowstone air, Ghost completely changed. He didn't just wake up, he materialized. 1 second he was a curled, breathing mass of dark fur resting against my heavy boots, and the next, he was standing rigidly between me and the edge of the woods. I watched in frozen disbelief as the coarse black fur along his spine stood straight up, forming a sharp, aggressive ridge from the base of his neck all the way to his tail. His ears, which were usually pinned back to his skull in a state of constant anxiety, were swiveled forward like radar dishes, locking onto the darkness. His body was stiff, his muscles coiled like a steel spring ready to snap violently, and then from deep within his chest, a sound began to build. It started as a low, vibrating hum, something I could literally feel trembling through the cold earth beneath my shoes. It was a primal, rumbling growl that seemed to pull the cold air right out of the clearing. It was a warning. A deep, guttural threat aimed directly into the impenetrable blackness of the forest. My silent, traumatized rescue dog, the one who would normally cower under the van at the sound of a dropping metal spoon, was suddenly baring his teeth and holding the line. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. My chest tightened in that familiar, terrifying way, the suffocating grip of my PTSD seizing my lungs, paralyzing my limbs, trapping me in a state of absolute terror. My mind screamed at me to move, to stand up, to lunge for the canister of bear spray resting on the van's front bumper, just 3 feet away, but my muscles completely refused to obey. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, locked inside my own unresponsive body, staring into the abyss. Ghost! I breathed out again, my voice trembling violently in the cold air. Shh! Easy, boy. Back up into the van. But Ghost didn't retreat an inch. He planted his large paws firmly into the dirt, his growl escalating into a menacing, vibrating snarl that revealed a flash of sharp white fangs in the dim moonlight. He wasn't growling at a shadow. He was locking eyes with something terribly real. Out of the dense ink-black curtain of the pine trees, the darkness began to shift. It separated itself from the woods. A hulking, towering silhouette stepped slowly into the pale, silver glow of the moon, its massive, humpbacked frame swinging low to the ground as it caught our scent. The metallic smell of cold dirt, pine sap, and sudden, overwhelming danger filled the air. We were completely alone, hours from any chance of help, standing face to face with the undisputed king of the American wilderness. Time has a cruel way of tearing itself apart when your mind is breaking. As that massive grizzly bear took its first deliberate step into the pale moonlight, the seconds stretched into hours. My breath caught in my throat, not just from the suffocating presence of the apex predator, but from the crushing, familiar weight of my own broken mind. The sheer terror of the moment didn't just root me to the spot. It grabbed me by the collar and hurled me violently backward into the life I thought I had left behind. I had come out here to disappear. After my third tour in Afghanistan, I didn't come back whole. The military doctors called it severe post-traumatic stress disorder, but clinical labels don't even begin to describe the absolute hell of living in a body that believes it is constantly under attack. In the city, there was no peace. None. A garbage truck dropping a metal dumpster sounded exactly like an IED detonating. The sudden screech of subway brakes felt like incoming artillery. A slamming car door in the apartment alleyway would send me diving for the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs while I gasped for air in a cold, pathetic sweat. I was losing my mind, entirely consumed by the noise of a world that refused to let me heal. I couldn't keep a job. I couldn't keep my friends. I couldn't even sleep for more than an hour at a time. So I sold everything I owned, bought the beat-up Ford Transit van, and drove as far away from concrete and sirens as the map would allow. I traded the suffocating city for the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the American West. I just wanted silence. I just wanted it all to stop. That was how I found Ghost, or rather, how we found each other. I was passing through a dusty, forgotten town in Wyoming when I stopped at a local animal shelter just to fill up my water jugs. As I walked down the long, depressing row of concrete runs, deafened by the chaotic, desperate barking of dozens of abandoned dogs, I saw him. He was shoved into the very last cage in the darkest corner of the building. He wasn't barking. He wasn't pacing. He was just pressed as tightly against the cinder block wall as physically possible, shaking uncontrollably, his dark eyes wide and hollow. The shelter volunteer told me he was a lost cause. He had been severely abused by his previous owner, beaten, starved, and chained to a rusted radiator until his spirit was entirely crushed. He was terrified of everything, especially loud noises, and he had never made a single sound since the day they brought him in. They were scheduled to put him down the very next morning. Looking into that cage, I didn't just see a dog. I saw a mirror. I saw the exact same hollow, exhausted terror that stared back at me from the rearview mirror of my van every single morning. I saw a soldier left behind. I paid his adoption fee right then and there. I didn't buy a pet that day. I formed a silent pact with another broken soul. We didn't need words. We didn't demand anything from each other. For the past 6 months, we had existed in a quiet, mutual understanding. I gave him a safe, warm place to sleep at the foot of my bed, and he gave me a reason to wake up and keep driving. We were two ghosts haunting the back roads of America, healing in the absolute quiet of the wilderness. But as the grizzly bear swung its massive heavy head toward us, its wet nose twitching as it caught our scent, the brutal irony of my situation hit me like a freight train. I had driven thousands of miles into the middle of nowhere to escape the perceived danger of the city, only to find myself completely defenseless in the face of nature's raw, unfeeling violence. The wild doesn't care about your trauma. The wild doesn't care if you've already been through hell. It just survives. And right now, sitting frozen in my canvas chair with my muscles locked in a violent panic attack, I wasn't surviving. I was giving up. The familiar ringing in my ears began to drown out the wind. The edges of my vision darkened into a tunnel. My lungs simply refused to expand. I was completely paralyzing myself, trapped inside the prison of my own mind, while 1,000 pounds of lethal muscle and claws closed the distance between us. The bear let out a low, huffing breath that puffed into a cloud of white steam in the freezing air. It dropped to all fours, its immense shoulder muscles rolling under its thick, silver-tipped fur. It was preparing to charge. My mind went entirely blank. Surrendering to the inevitable, I had run as far as I could, and this was where it ended. But Ghost hadn't given up. My silent, broken boy, the dog who flinched at his own shadow, stepped forward. The grizzly didn't rush. It didn't need to. It moved with the terrifying, arrogant confidence of a creature that knew absolutely nothing in these woods could kill it. With every heavy, deliberate step it took into the faint, silver illumination of the moon, its sheer, impossible size became more horrifyingly clear. It was a cathedral of muscle and claw, easily weighing 700 pounds, its thick, silver-tipped coat rippling over its massive shoulders. I could hear the wet, heavy sound of its breathing. I could smell it, a foul, musky stench of rotting pine needles, damp earth, and old, dry blood. It swung its massive head low to the ground, its dark, dead eyes fixing directly on me. I needed to move. The canister of bear spray was sitting on the camper van's front bumper, barely 3 feet away. 3 feet. A single, desperate lunge, a flick of the orange safety clip, and a blinding wall of capsaicin would stand between me and a gruesome, violent death. But my body was gone. The PTSD didn't just paralyze me, it completely abducted me. The heavy rhythmic thud of the bear's paws against the frozen earth rapidly morphed into the terrifying ground-shaking boom of distant artillery. The crushing darkness of the Yellowstone tree line dissolved into the suffocating, dust-choked alleyways of Kandahar. My chest locked instantly. A cold iron band tightened around my lungs, crushing the oxygen out of me. I was gasping, but nothing was going in. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my legs. I was a helpless spectator trapped behind my own eyes, forced to watch my death approach in slow motion. I tried to scream, to wave my arms, to do absolutely anything to make myself look big and intimidating, but all that escaped my trembling lips was a pathetic, broken wheeze. I was failing, again. I had survived a brutal war. I had survived the soul-crushing despair of the city, only to die frozen in a cheap folding chair because my broken brain refused to let me fight back. The bear was 10 yards away, then 8, then 5. It let out a sharp, guttural huff, snapping its jaws together in a clear, aggressive warning. It was claiming the space. It was claiming my life. And then, Ghost shattered the world. My silent, trembling rescue dog. The dog who had spent his entire life cowering from shadows. The dog who flinched when the wind blew too hard against the van's windshield, threw himself out directly into the path of the grizzly. He didn't just step forward. He launched himself with the explosive force of a missile, planting his heavy paws firmly in the dirt just inches from my boots, and he barked. It wasn't a normal dog bark. It was an eruption. It was a deafening, chest-rattling roar of pure, unfiltered fury that ripped through the dead silence of the Yellowstone night like a chainsaw. For 6 long months, Ghost had kept every ounce of his pain, his fear, and his trauma locked tightly inside his throat. Now he let it all out. He bared every single one of his teeth, the fur on his neck standing up so high, he looked twice his actual size. He snapped his jaws in the air, throwing his entire 90-pound frame forward, his barks coming in rapid, deafening, violent bursts. He sounded like a demon. He sounded absolutely unhinged. He sounded like a creature that was fully prepared to die tonight as long as he took the monster down with him. Bark, bark, bark. The sound hit me like a physical blow, shocking my nervous system. But strangely, it didn't trigger my panic. It anchored me. The explosive noise wasn't the sound of a falling bomb or a city siren or a collapsing building. It was the sound of absolute, unconditional loyalty. It was the sound of a protector. The grizzly stopped dead in its tracks. The sheer, unexpected violence of Ghost's explosion caught the massive predator completely off guard. Wild animals, even apex predators, run on a strict economy of calories and risk. The bear had expected an easy meal, a terrified frozen prey. It had not expected a psychotic, snarling wolf dog ready to wage a bloody war over a patch of frozen dirt. Ghost took another aggressive step forward, closing the terrifying distance, his barks echoing off the distant canyon walls, unrelenting and feral. "I am here," the barks seemed to scream into the night. "You will not touch him. You will have to kill me first." For 3 agonizing, heart-stopping seconds, The world hung in the balance. The Grizzly stood its ground, swaying its massive, heavy head from side to side, sizing up the furious German Shepherd. It let out one final, frustrated huff, blowing hot spit into the freezing air, its dark eyes shifting from Ghost to me. Then it blinked. Slowly, deliberately, the bear turned its massive shoulders. It dropped its gaze, gave one last dismissive grunt, and lumbered back into the impenetrable blackness of the tree line. As the sound of snapping branches slowly faded into the distance as the beast retreated deep into the forest, leaving us entirely alone in the freezing, echoing quiet. Ghost didn't stop barking until the very last sound of the bear had completely vanished. Only then did the frantic noise cease. He stood there in the moonlight for a long moment, his chest heaving heavily, his breath puffing in rapid white clouds. Then he slowly turned his head, looked back at me with those dark, soulful eyes, and gently nudged my frozen, trembling hand with his wet nose. The touch of Ghost's wet nose against my trembling, frozen hand was the very thing that finally broke the spell. I gasped, a ragged, desperate sound, as freezing air suddenly rushed back into my paralyzed lungs. My legs, feeling like absolute dead weight, somehow managed to push me out of the folding camp chair. I grabbed Ghost by his thick nylon collar, not pulling him but using his solid, muscular frame to ground myself in reality, and we stumbled backward toward the open side door of the transit van. I practically threw us both inside, slamming the heavy sliding door shut with a deafening metallic clang. I threw the deadbolt, frantically locked the front doors, and collapsed onto the worn linoleum floor, my back pressed hard against the cold wooden cabinet of the kitchenette. For a long, agonizing time, the only sounds in the world were our overlapping, exhausted breaths. The inside of the camper van was pitch black, save for the faint, amber glow of the digital clock on the dashboard reading 1:14 a.m. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely feel my own fingers. The adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow to the chest, sending violent, uncontrollable tremors through my entire body. Usually, this is the exact moment where the darkness completely takes over. Usually, a panic attack of this magnitude would send me spiraling into a devastating, days-long depression, locking me inside a mental cage of my own failure, fear, and survivor's guilt. But as I sat there in the dark, shivering on the floorboards with my knees pulled to my chest, something was fundamentally different. I felt a heavy, warm weight press against my side. Ghost hadn't retreated to his usual safe spot under the elevated platform bed. Instead, he crawled right into my lap. All 90 pounds of him folded his long, gangly legs and buried his massive, blocky head directly into my chest. He was trembling, too. The massive surge of adrenaline was leaving his system just like it was leaving mine. I slowly wrapped my arms around his thick neck, burying my face in his coarse, black fur. He smelled like pine needles, cold dirt, and absolute safety. As I held him tightly in the dark, he let out a long, shuddering sigh, and then, for the very first time since I had brought him home from that concrete kennel, he reached up and gently licked my cheek. That tiny, gentle gesture completely broke me. The emotional dam that I had been desperately holding together for years. Through the grueling combat deployments, through the devastating transition back to civilian life, through the crushing, suffocating loneliness of the city, finally shattered, I began to weep. It wasn't a quiet, dignified cry. It was a heavy, ugly, shoulder-shaking sob that tore out of my chest and echoed in the small, cramped confines of the camper van. I cried for the friends I had lost overseas. I cried for the life I couldn't seem to rebuild. But most importantly, I cried because, for the first time in almost a decade, I didn't feel entirely alone in the trenches. I thought about that bark, that furious, ear-splitting, violent roar that had ripped from Ghost's throat just moments ago. Any other sudden loud noise, a car backfiring, a slamming door, a dropped tool, would have sent me into a blind, terrifying panic. But Ghost's bark hadn't triggered my PTSD. It had anchored me. It was a battle cry from a creature who loved me enough to face down a 1,000-pound apex predator in the dead of night. In that terrifying, explosive moment, Ghost had taken the agonizing silence of his own trauma and weaponized it to keep me safe. He had spoken up when I was entirely voiceless. I reached up with a trembling hand and turned on the small, warm yellow reading light above the bed. The dim illumination bathed the van interior in a soft, comforting glow, highlighting the familiar, worn details of our tiny home. I looked down at Ghost. His dark, intelligent eyes were soft now, The fierce, unhinged protector completely gone, replaced once again by the gentle, soulful companion who just wanted to be near me. I stroked the long ridge of his spine, feeling his breathing slowly, steadily synchronized with my own. The biting cold outside the van was still there, the wind was still howling, and the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Yellowstone was still surrounding us, but inside this tiny metal box, it was warm. It was safe. As I sat there on the floor holding him, letting the last of my tears dry against his fur, the absolute truth of our journey hit me with the force of a revelation. I thought I had driven out here to save a broken dog from a high-kill shelter. I thought I was the one giving him a 6-on chance at life. But the truth is, I never rescued Ghost. He rescued me. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, but for the first time in years, the sleeplessness wasn't driven by terror. It was driven by a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. I sat on the floor of the camper van with my back against the cabinets, my hand resting steadily on Ghost's rhythmic, rising chest until the pitch-black sky outside my frosted windows slowly began to bleed into a bruised, fragile purple. The howling wind that had battered the side of the Ford Transit all night finally died down, leaving behind a crisp, absolute stillness that felt completely different from the terrifying silence of the hours before. It felt like a slate being wiped clean. When the first true rays of the morning sun finally broke over the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Yellowstone caldera, it flooded the cramped interior of the van with a brilliant, blinding gold. The morning light caught the dust motes dancing in the cold air and illuminated the deep, rich brown of Ghost's eyes as he finally lifted his heavy head from my lap. He let out a long, theatrical yawn, stretching his front legs out until his paws hit the dashboard, looking entirely unfazed by the fact that he had faced down a 1,000-pound apex predator just hours before. He wasn't a broken shelter dog anymore, and as I pulled myself up from the floor, I realized I wasn't a broken soldier anymore either. I unbolted the heavy sliding door and pushed it open. The freezing morning air hit my face like a splash of ice water, waking up every nerve ending in my body. I stepped out onto the frosty dirt. There, just 10 yards away, imprinted deeply into the frozen mud and the light dusting of morning frost, were the massive, undeniable tracks of the grizzly bear. They were terrifyingly huge, a physical reminder of just how close to the edge we had come. But right beside my boots were Ghost's prints, planted firmly, defiantly holding the line. I stood there in the quiet dawn, holding a steaming mug of instant black coffee, staring at those tracks. For years, my PTSD had felt exactly like that bear, a massive, unstoppable monster stalking me from the dark tree line of my own mind, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when I was completely paralyzed and defenseless. I had run 1,000 miles to escape it, but standing here in the cold Wyoming light, I finally understood that you can't outrun the darkness. You just need someone brave enough to stand beside you and bark back at it. We didn't linger at the campsite. I packed up the folding chair, kicked dirt over the cold ashes of the fire pit, and climbed into the driver's seat. When I turned the key, the old transit engine sputtered for a second before roaring to life, a steady, comforting rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Ghost immediately hopped up into the passenger seat, his designated co-pilot spot. He didn't cower in the footwell. He didn't curl into a tight, anxious ball. He sat tall, his ears perked up, watching the world through the windshield with a quiet, dignified confidence. I put the van in drive, and we slowly rolled out of the heavy timber, leaving the shadows of the forest behind us. As we merged onto the empty, sprawling expanse of the 2-lane highway, the endless American West opened up before us. The sky was an impossible, endless blue, stretching out over the golden plains and the towering mountains. I rolled down the passenger window, letting the biting, pine-scented wind rush into the cabin. Ghost immediately pushed his massive head out into the slipstream, his eyes squinting against the bright sunlight, his ears flapping wildly in the wind, taking in every single scent the wild road had to offer. People in the city used to tell me that packing up my life and moving into a camper van would be the loneliest thing I could ever do. They told me I was isolating myself, that I was just running away from my problems, and that the off-grid living would eventually break me. But as I reached over and rested my hand on the back of Ghost's thick, warm neck, feeling the steady, powerful pulse of his life right beneath my fingers, I knew they were entirely wrong. The wilderness doesn't break you. It strips away everything that doesn't matter until you are left with only the absolute truth. And the truth is, you're never truly alone when a loyal dog walks beside you. You are never beyond saving as long as you have something or someone worth fighting for. We all carry invisible scars. We all have monsters waiting in the dark. But today, Ghost and I are still breathing, the fuel tank is full, and the road ahead is wide open. What about you? Has a dog ever stepped up and changed the entire course of your life? Have you ever experienced a moment where a rescue animal ended up rescuing you? I want to read every single one of your stories, so please share them down in the comments below. If our journey resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join our pack. Ghost and I have a lot more roads to travel, and we'd love for you to ride shotgun with us. Until next time, stay safe, keep driving, and hold your best friend a little closer tonight.